Good evening. It's the Darkstream, Vox Day with Infogalactic News and voxday.blogspot.com. Thanks for joining me. You're probably aware that in the French elections, both the mainstream parties have been defeated, replaced by the centrist Macron and Le Pen of the Front National. Now, a lot of people are trying to act like they know anything about the French elections or the French political system. It's kind of ridiculous to pretend that you know what's going on just because you read a New York Times article and a couple online articles spitting out the obvious, which are that people are saying, well, don't get too excited because in the second round the different candidate supporters are just going to vote for Macron. Okay, we know this is how the French system works. The challenge of the French system is that it basically gives the mainstream a crack at a veto. They get two slices they get two at bats. And so, but it's always been this way. This is not news. Everybody knows this. But what people are not paying attention to, and what a lot of people don't understand about France, is that the Front National is not a right-wing party. The Front National is actually probably to the left of the American Democratic Party in general. It would be a huge stretch to call them Nazis, but they are, to a certain extent, national. They're nationalists, and they're also socialists. They're very anti-Islam. They're very anti-EU. And so what a lot of people don't understand is that the French left has historically and has always been anti-EU. And if you look at, it was a big concern, actually. It was a big concern that Mélenchon would get through to the second round with Le Pen, because if they had, then Frexit was all but guaranteed. Because both Mélenchon and the who is far left and did pretty well. Got something like, according to the estimates, got around 19% of the vote. They're very, it was possible that you'd have two anti-EU candidates running for the presidency. So, and also keep in mind that all the projections that they have, those are not final numbers yet. So it's impossible. Anybody who is telling you that, oh, Macron is definitely the next French president and so forth, doesn't really know what they're talking about. Also, Macron does not have anybody, because he's running as a centrist without a proper party around him. That means he has no support in the legislature. The Front National has people in the legislature, and so even though they can't get a majority in Parliament, neither can anyone else. But so the important thing is going to be to see how well the two left candidates do. And the other thing that they tend to leave out when they're talking about this is that there's another left-wing candidate, basically the communist candidate, who got 6% of the vote. So if you start to add this stuff up, you go, okay, you've got Mélenchon with 19%, you've got 6% with the communist, that's 25%. There are some reports that Le Pen got as much as 25%. Suddenly you're looking at potentially a 50% vote for the Front National against the EU. Now, I'm not saying that's going to take place. You know, obviously, the communists are not big fans of the Front National. You know, they're communists. But the point is, we don't know. You know, we don't know what the French left is going to vote on. We know that they're, I think that it is entirely possible that the communists will support Le Pen because they're anti-EU. You need to understand the big thing one of the big divides in France, and it has been for the past 20, 25 years, is what they call the Anglophone, Anglo-capitalism. And so, you know, the hardcore left, the socialists and the communists, have never, ever supported the European Union. They have always regarded it as a plot by the bankers and the capitalists, and they certainly have a considerable amount of evidence supporting their case. You know, those of us on the right oppose the EU for other reasons, but some of those reasons overlap. And so that's the question: is will these, you know, what will these people do? And we don't know. And so, and it is true too. Yeah, I have made this observation before. Communism is better than multiculturalism. If you look at the Soviet Union, if you look at Russia today, who is better off right now, the United States or Russia? The U.S. was much better off. You know, when you went back to 1986 or so, prior to the Reagan amnesty, you know, the U.S. was absolutely in a much stronger position. Certainly if you go back to 1965, it was much better off. But now that, you know, the one thing that communism did was that it protected the nations, ironically, given that it's, you know, a internationalist ideology. But if we judge it by the consequences, if we judge it by the way that it actually kept the nation together, it's quite obvious that it is a less destructive ideology in the long run than multiculturalism. Now, does that mean that I'm pro-communist? Of course not. It's ridiculous. No, the globalists do not want communism and socialism. You know, people thought that they did for a while, but now it's very clear that they don't. You know, there's a difference between economic Marxism and cultural Marxism. And so, anyhow, yeah, there is a certain element of frying pan versus fire. But at the end of the day, and here's the most important thing to understand, you can recover, a nation can recover from communism. A nation cannot recover from excess multiculturalism. And so that's why it's easy for me to conceptually support someone like Trump, to support someone like Marine Le Pen, because they are focused on the single most important element. And no, that's not true. The idea that multiculturalism and a free market would protect from that's ridiculous. That's the libertarian fallacy. And so, you know, I understand. I mean, I used to buy into that for a while myself till I thought through it a little bit more deeply. But is it communism or fascism that preserve the nations? It doesn't really matter. The point is that you know, whether they implemented it perfectly or not, whether multiculturalism is perfectly implemented or not, it's irrelevant. We can still judge it by the practices. We can still judge it by the consequences. Well, you know, I'm part Mexican, so that would I would theoretically qualify. But but the point is, to get back to France, all I'm encouraging you to understand is that it is too early to decide. It is too early to make any claims about whether Le Pen can win or not. I mean, certainly the smarter bet at this point would the assumption, the natural assumption would be that Macron will win. But it's not necessary. Dude, just drop the libertarian bullshit dogma. I'm an economist and I'm a former libertarian. I know those arguments. I understand them. They're all theoretical. They're all wrong. So, actually, I think that I'm, given that I'm a Native American, that I think that that's actually I think that's where the Mexican must have come from. I am definitely revolutionary Mexican, though. My great grandfather rode with Pancho Villa and was one of his secretaries, and so yeah, definitely from that side of it. That's probably why one of my friends said that's probably why I am so naturally controversial. On my father's side, I'm descended from an American revolutionary. On my mother's side, from a Mexican revolutionary. So there will certainly be more terror attacks in France. That's the other X factor relating to the possibility of a Le Pen win. The chances that there's going to be another Nice, another Balaclava, or whatever it's called, are there. I mean, you can't put you can't put an estimate on it, because these are Bataclan. There we go. These are things that are impossible to calculate. And no, the Muslims they don't think that way. They act when they act. In fact, they actually tend to like acting in what would appear to be a counterproductive manner, simply because that just proves that they're right when they succeed despite themselves. It's sort of an act of faith in a way. So anyhow, it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see what happens. It's certainly encouraging to see that nationalism continues to rise. Le Pen's, Le Pen is like Trump. She's not going to be perfect. I mean, just today, Trump had some particularly idiotic public statements about the illegal dreamers. I mean, he said something about it coming from the heart. Well, someone needs to tell the God Emperor, nobody gives a damn about heart. We would like to see more head. We'd like to see more rational thought, and we'd like to see more actual strategic long-term thinking. Now, again, you need to be cautious about putting too much stock into any one thing that Trump says, because he speaks off the cuff all the time. He contradicts himself all the time. So I wouldn't overreact. I mean, he nobody is that likable without having having pretty strong emotional strains. And so it sounds like some people are saying here, it sounds like Sessions got on top of that right away, and so that's good. No, nothing that happens short of losing a war in Korea or in Syria right now is capable of ruining Trump's chances in 2020. It's too soon. It's just much too soon. Only something incredibly, if he doesn't build the wall, if he manages to lose 2 carrier groups to Korea, those are the kind of things that could really ruin his presidency. Um, what would, if Trump were to be more the same, what would be the options for the alt-right? Whoever comes along next. I mean, Trump is not the answer. Trump was never going to solve anything. You know, the question, I mean, the main thing was that Hillary didn't become president. If Hillary had become president, there's a very good chance we would already be at war with Russia right now. You know, Trump has already been an excellent president by virtue of not being Hillary. And so you need to keep that in mind. You know, and that's right. I mean, I've said it, Ryutso is saying it, the alt-right is inevitable. Not necessarily in terms of coming to power through the American political system, but our ideas are inevitable because they are true. And so now we may have come along too late. You know, I've said for over 15 years that I expect the U.S. to fall apart by around 2033. I think it will. I don't see any sign that the American political system is going to adjust quickly enough to prevent that. There's no reason to believe that it will or it can. But that was just based on the average lifespan of currencies. So that's basically 70 years from Bretton Woods. And so, you know, so we'll have to see. I mean, the other factor is beyond I mean, I made that calculation a long time ago. The other big factor with regards to the U.S. is that, you know, we have seen the largest migration of peoples in human history. And if you've read the essay called War and Migration by Martin Van Creveld in There Will Be War, Volume 10, it shows, he shows that basically migration and war are one and the same. War always follows the movement of people. And this was the biggest one in history. There's more foreigners and their kids living in the United States than there are Germans living in Germany, Brits living in Great Britain, French living in France. And so there's no chance that those people are going to want to continue living under a system that is not what they prefer. And so, anyhow, if you put those things together, yes, multicultural nations did exist in history. They used to be called empires, and they always fell apart, usually through war, and fractured on ethnic and religious lines. That's normal. You know, like I always like to tell people or ask people, where do you think homogeneous nations come from? They don't all come from geography. They come from war. And so, and people get driven out. A lot of people don't realize how many Germans were driven out of the countries that are in now Eastern Europe, where they had lived for generations. You know, I mean, you might remember, you know, the Polish city of Gdansk. Well, that's a relatively new Polish name for Danzig. And so, yeah, people moved around. I mean, people moved around a fair amount. I mean, they didn't travel like they do now, but the point is that, yeah, I don't know if it was 12 million. I thought it was more like 5 million, but anyhow, the point is that there's this huge ethnic cleansing after World War II that nobody talks about. And so that's what, and you're seeing, whether you realize it or not, you're seeing ethnic cleansing in the United States right now. Look at the demographics of Detroit. Look at the demographics of Compton, California. In each case, you see a tremendous amount of ethnic cleansing. And so that's what we're going to see a lot of in the future. We're going to see it in Europe. we're going to see it in the United States. We're probably going to see a lot more of it in the United States, and it's going to be a lot messier in the United States because the lines are not as easily drawn. It's a lot harder to tell exactly what people are, who they belong to. There's more mixed race people, all that sort of thing, which is why it's probably going to be very messy. And so, that's one of the reasons why I've been trying to warn people about this so much and warn them of the dangers of multiculturalism and interracial dating and interracial adoption and all those sort of things. Not everybody can pass. And now it could, it could get really, really messy because now we have genetic testing. Even 20 years ago, I'm a white guy. No problem. I'm extremely introverted, and so, I fit the cliche. I am not at all concerned about Antifa arming themselves. It's a joke. I wouldn't worry about it. And so, history is a powerful argument. You just have to know it. You just have to take the time to read it. You can see I spend a reasonable amount of my time reading and learning history. I like it, but I also study it because that's the only way that I can reasonably hope to have some idea what is coming. It totally depends on what the subject is. That's too broad a question for me. The right in general, the conservatives, the alt-right, etc., are so heavily armed that it's just ridiculous. Most of us can, gun up not just our families, but all of our friends and half our relatives too. And so, I'm not too worried about Antifa deciding that they're going to go out and learn how to shoot a .22. There's guns all over Italy. A lot of people seem to think that guns are illegal in Europe. They're not. Pistols are illegal. No, in Europe there are tons of weapons. Look it up. There are, the hunting rifles and shotguns and all that sort of thing are all over the place. And so, the fact that you can't carry a pistol around, that might be irritating. But I think if you look at the gun ownership rates in places like Italy and stuff, it's like 15% or something. It's very, very far from being completely disarmed. It's just that a lot of the younger college people have absolutely no idea that granddad's rifle is upstairs or whatever. And so they definitely do. Liga Nord, no, it wasn't Liga Nord, but there were some incidents in Italy a couple of 2 years ago, I think, where they were actually firing on a migrant camp. And so, it's a lot more. Think about it. You know how inaccurate the media is about everything they report on, and so why would you think that what they tell you about Europe is accurate either? It's completely inaccurate. And one of the things that was startling for me moving over here was to find out how much more free Europe was in a lot of ways than the U.S. I remember one time just going and paying cash for a car. It was the kind of thing that I would have ended up arrested and the money all taken away by the police if I'd tried to do that in Minnesota. And so, it's not, there's different, it's very different. You can't really compare it, but the big thing is, the U.S. is where the main power is centered in the world. Actually, that reminds me of a joke. There's this left-wing Australian comic, and he was talking about. He said, if you want to be free, go to India. He said, you can do anything you want in India. You can sell you can sell prescription medicines right next to the guy, selling a cat for stew, and he said, I buy all my medicine in India, and everyone like laughed and said, well, what are you talking about? He said, well, who knows more what he's talking about? The 103-year-old guy who just has one tooth and lives in a barrel, but he's lived for 103 years, or the physician with a degree in 2 mortgages on his house. He's like, who's the dummy? So, anyhow, there's obvious downsides to that, but the point is that freedom is not what makes a society great. There's more to it than that. If freedom is all it takes, then Somalia and India are the best places to live in the world, and I don't know anyone who thinks that. So, anyhow, that's all I have for tonight. But thanks for stopping by, and just remember, don't get too carried away by what the media tells you about Front National and Le Pen's chances. We don't know yet. I'll look into it. I'll read up on the numbers, and then I'll come up with an analysis myself. But in the meantime, just think for yourself. Don't believe what the media tells you, and regardless, think positive. The main thing that they want to do is demoralize you, and so one of my objectives is just to remind you that no matter how bad it looks, I can give you a list of 1,000 times in history when it was worse. So, thanks again, and we'll see you later.